I am very excited to be here and introduce our moderator and our panel. Our moderator, Lauralee Martin, is President and Chief Executive Officer of HCP Inc. Prior to joining HCP, she served as the Chief Executive Officer Americas of Jones Lang LaSalle. Lauralee joined Jones Lang LaSalle as Chief Financial Officer and was given the expanded responsibilities of CFO as well as Chief Operating Officer. Additionally, she served on its board of directors. Prior to joining Jones Lang LaSalle, she was Executive Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and President of the Real Estate Finance Division of Heller Financial Inc. This morning, Lauralee has the challenging responsibility of managing a discussion among three very smart, very entrepreneurial, and very outside-the-box thinkers to kick off the fall meeting and get you thinking. Our panel consists of Scott Heiferman, the CEO and founder of Meetup, Brad Katsuyama, the president and CEO of IEX, and Vincent Stanley, the co-editor of the Footprint Chronicles and former vice president of marketing and communications at Patagonia. So sit back and enjoy the ride.
We are part of ULI's program that brings you speakers that talk about the trends that make a changing world. Having met my speakers, I'm also very proud to tell you that they also very much support ULI's focus on leadership, because these are people that have vision, an absolute drive for a goal, courage of their conviction, and get up every day thinking about a purpose and an impact, and that impact needs to be positive. Very high-level introduction of my panelists. I should start by saying Brad probably doesn't need an introduction, but Brad Katsuyama, who has the starring role in Flash Boys, about the high-speed trading. If you haven't seen that, you might have seen him profiled on 60 Minutes. There's a quote in the book which I very much think characterizes Brad. Brad and his team were all very much in. What they were in for was less clear. They did have a goal to restore fairness to the US stock market for the first time in Wall Street history. Brad was not a radical, but he was simply in possession of radical truths. Connection to ULI? Well, think capital markets. I don't know, Brad deals in milliseconds, but we'll see what that does when we think about our capital markets. Next, Vincent Stanley. Vincent is the longest employee of Patagonia. I love your jacket. He's described himself as chief storyteller, a poet. He was director of marketing at the time that they were running their very anti-consumerism ad, "Don't buy this jacket." He's recently co-edited with Yvonne Chouinard the book called Responsible Company, making a clear case that you can do business well while doing good, even taking on a chapter called Meaningful Work. Connection to ULI, that's just probably very clear, building healthy places and our efforts around resiliency and sustainability. And Scott Heiferman, CEO of Meetup. I call Meetup a physical Facebook. When I was talking to Scott, I said you had 15-some million members at the start of this year, and he corrected me and said we're now up to 20 million. But they organize some 315,000 meetups a month. Personal sort of story about Meetup. Our daughter graduated from college, went to a new city, and called home and said, I don't know what to do. I don't know anyone here. Went online, found a meetup that said, women 30 or under new to town. She now has two very good friends 4 years later, thanks to Meetup. But Scott is also a serial entrepreneur. He started the first online ad agency called iTraffic, then went on to Photolog, which he sold, but it was the #1 social network. It was basically photo sharing in several countries before he sold it. But one of his quotes was, I don't think you can take for granted that any social network is going to be here in 10 years. Connection to ULI? Well, clearly we need the physical, the virtual, and the people to all come together, and hopefully he'll help us know how to do that. I want to start with the concept of speed, because we've heard that this morning. And we've heard some very different paces of speed, from milliseconds to much longer, and particularly when we think about real estate being very physical, and speed may not be the kindest friend to real estate. So Brad, we haven't had volatility in the stock market for a period of time until last week. And I was up early and watching the TV, and there's just chaos because in the first 10 minutes, you know, it's moving 300 points. What was it like at IEX that morning?
So at IEX, it's surprisingly pretty calm. When I ran a trading desk at a broker, I remember I was running that desk. It was the financial crisis, 2008. It was unbelievably intense. You'd go home every day. My blood pressure skyrocketed. It was a tough time. When you're the end market, and computers are matching buyers and sellers, you just kind of sit there and watch it run. And in a way, that's not all we do, but you know, it's a little bit more involved than that. But it's whether the market's up, whether the market is down. The big thing there is that we processed over 1 billion messages. In terms of that, that's the amount of market data that was being generated during those volatile moves. So glad to see that our systems kind of held up and performed very, very well. But it's surprisingly calm. Most days I don't know if the market's gone up or down, which is, you know, I lived and died by that in my old job. So it's much different.
And Vincent, your pace, you talk about meditation. One of the things Patagonia talks about is they want their employees to lead and have examine their lives. That's a very slow pace, and yet a lot of the things you're very focused on are coming at this world really fast, thinking climate change and the issues of limited resources, and yet it seems like you can't get anyone to focus on speed like Brad can. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because what we make clothes for the experience of going out and having a different sense of time, a much slower and deeper sense of time. But we're in business, and we actually rely on innovation and a sense of urgency for success in our business. So I think you need both in life. We need both to address the climate change issue. We're dealing with really urgent issues that require a sense not necessarily of speed, but of focus, and without a lot of false moves. But at the same time, what we have right now, I think, is a kind of hamster cage sense of time that we may not have adjusted to since the development of these new technologies, as evidenced in what happened in the stock market world, or as evidenced in what Scott is trying to counteract in the tech space.
Well, you actually made the comment that the world can't handle the speed, the resources that it's coming at them.
Nature, nature can't, and we probably can't either. So I think it really is we have a need to recover that sense of time, which is not digital in some way. Jeremy Rifkin wrote a lot about that about 20 years ago, about the change in the sense of time from the simple clock of going around and repeating itself to the flashing number. But and I think that that's connected to this yearning for connection, intimacy, and for the local.
Now, Scott, first of all, thank you for sharing and your opening the challenges of running a business, because there's no question there's a lot of fun and there's a lot of emotion and hardship that goes with it. As you think about Vincent and Patagonia's model of a business that also does good, and by the way, I heard one of your quotes where you said, there's so many smart people out there, I don't know why they don't create businesses where people say thank you to them. And clearly people are saying thank you to them. But in a sense, you've created a convention business. You've created a Facebook marketing business. There's a whole lot of commercial aspects in there. How do you think about that when you're bringing people together and the business model?
Well, I'm proud as hell of the fact that we're not in the marketing business. We're not in the ad business. We're not selling, you know, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Is something that someone said that I thought interesting. So, you know, just for what it's worth, the you know, Meetup runs without, you know, ads or anything. Yet we are sustainable because people pay to, you know, 1% of the people who. Actually, 1 to 5% of the people who use it pay something for it. They pay a listing fee to promote their meetup, and so we're not. What was your question again? I needed to defend myself that we're not some.
But I mean, the Patagonia model is they're driven by doing good, and yet they have managed to also have it be a very commercial model. And you know, I know that you want this to be a good thing, and I'm sort of probing into the commercial model.
Hey, you know, the guy who runs a good restaurant, you know, is doing good business. You know, my dad ran a paint store. You know, people need paint, so you know, that's good business. I happen to also be a lifelong sort of, you know, fan of guys like Patagonia. But you know, I think we you know, I think we're headed into an era where consumers will be savvier and smarter and more conscious and will be able to spend money in ways that are more in line with their values, no doubt. And also, really, the best people the best people to hire certainly want to make money, but also have a rising consciousness about wanting to make a difference and not, you know, screw people over to make a good living. And the good news is there's more and more companies like mine, which are you know, making money and doing something needed.
I mean, even if you think about Wall Street, right? It doesn't have necessarily the best reputation. What was surprising to us is that, you know, after the 60 Minutes episode aired, before the show had even finished, we got 200 resumes. We're sitting on probably 1,500 right now. There's only 40 employees, so there's a bit of a supply-demand issue. But people responded. A lot of people from the industry responded. And I think that, you know, I don't think anyone really has an issue with people making money. I think it's how you make your money is really what people question. And, you know, as the world becomes more transparent, it's harder to make money in more nefarious ways or in more secretive ways than it once was, let's call it, you know, 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that, I mean, that was one of the greatest motivations for us to quit our jobs and to start IEX, is because we felt like, you know, Wall Street plays a critical role, but the role it plays and how it plays it is going to change pretty dramatically. And I think that, you know, technology and just the way society is evolving has a lot to do with that. And you know, it's great to kind of hear. Just sitting next to him makes me calmer, right? There's a balance. There's a balance of short-term and long-term ambition, and I think that at IEX we always try to focus on the long term. What are we doing? Because you know, if people ask you, how in the world do we get here with the stock market? It's about a lot of short-term incentives and people responding to those incentives without ever stepping back and saying, why does the stock market exist? What is the point? The point here is to help companies raise capital and to help investors allocate that capital efficiently between themselves. A lot of what happens today and a lot of where the money is spent has nothing to do with that. So we've kind of lost our way. And I think part of it is because people respond very aggressively to short-term incentives, especially as the incentives go up. And part of it is about just removing yourself from that, focusing on the long term and trying to make money the right way, because I think that becomes more important.
I need to take a quote. One second, Vincent. I was going to take a quote from the book. It said, Brad's biggest weakness as a strategist was his inability to imagine just how badly others might behave. So anyhow, Vincent, go ahead.
I spoke at a school last year, and afterwards the dean asked me into his office. It doesn't usually happen. And he said, I've got this huge problem with placement. And this was an entrepreneurial program at a liberal arts college. And he said, none of my students want to go to work for bad companies. And it was his job to try and get people placed after they left. So I think there is a huge change right now among the millennials, people 18 to 34, who are both tying their values to how they consume, but I think more importantly to how they produce. Because what we do in our productive lives makes more of a difference environmentally and socially than what we do, whether we recycle or not.
Well, you just take that a step further. A lot of what you've all been talking about is you actually think one of the biggest changes going on is that there's going to be a change in the need for integrity, character, a new moral value. But you talk about the millennials, and then we talk about companies. What's your feeling on driving a gap down to where it connects? We need a meetup for that? No.
Yeah. Well, on that point and this notion of like people will behave badly, but probably the biggest lesson I learned in my career was, when I started Meetup, right after I got the backing of a hero of mine. That's Piero Midyar, the founder of eBay, and he said, people are generally good. And if you didn't believe that people are generally good, you wouldn't have started eBay, and you would have thought that everyone would completely rip each other off and it wouldn't work. Well, yeah, some people rip each other off, but eBay works, and if you would have said like a couple years ago, like, oh yeah, there's going to be this big business of people sleeping in each other's, renting each other's extra rooms out, and like you would think Airbnb is crazy, or that people will get into an unlicensed car, that like with Uber. The fact is that I think the most profound change that's going to happen in these years ahead, and it's going to it transforms cities and it changes people's lives, is this simple notion that that there will be trust, that a belief that people are generally good. You have to protect yourself from being ripped off, but it goes deeper than just the transactions or the economy of it. It's basically saying, are you, do you believe in people? Is there because the trust you might have in other people is basically your trust, your trust in the world. I'm sorry, this sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but it's actually, I think, really, it's important, and it affects. I think, like today you look at a Starbucks and everyone is just staring at their screen, and as people will know that, hey, there's 4 other people within 4 blocks who are also working on healthcare Android apps, and they can actually find the others, or people who, as they can meet up and help each other out, they will. It's happening. It's proven, but it's going to be an even more seismic cultural shift.
I think one of the big things is that you need to give people the incentive to behave the way they're naturally inclined to behave. So I think it's not necessarily about people are good or people are bad in general. It's people at times will respond to bad incentives, and the larger the incentive, sometimes the more inclined they are to respond that way. It was interesting. A funny story is the day before we launched, the 4 kind of founders and Michael Lewis, we had dinner, and he said, so what needs to happen for IEX to be successful? So I said, we need one player to really buy in and commit to us, one of the big banks. And he says, well, who do you think that's going to be? And I told him Goldman Sachs. And he almost fell out of his chair. He was so angry with me. He was like, what? He said, I can't, because Michael Lewis has kind of had it in for Goldman for a bit. But I said, listen, it's not about necessarily the company, but there's people there that I trust, who I've met, and I believe in these people. I'm making a bet on these people. Fast forward a year later, and they're our #1 client. And it's not to say, and I'm not trying to put them on a pedestal, but what IEX represented to a firm like Goldman Sachs and the people there was a choice. They had a choice. Before, there was really no other choice other than competing with other people and what solutions are they provided. But here's an industry-based utility owned by your clients. You now have a choice, and they made that choice. So I think it's, And
it didn't turn out badly for them.
No, I mean, it's about giving people choice, the opportunity to make good decisions. and incentivizing that way because clients have rewarded them. So I think that's the direction we see this moving, is give people the opportunity to behave and make good decisions.
So Vincent, at Patagonia, was it a hard decision to run a marketing ad that says, don't buy our product? And how did that, obviously it worked out well, but because there you're telling people, you're breaking the rules of, I'm promoting this, I want you to buy all these things. But was that a courageous decision, or how did Patagonia think about it?
It's interesting, in the aftermath, a lot of people ask us about our brilliant advertising campaign designed to boost sales. And almost nobody realizes that we ran that ad once.
But it go viral after that?
We never ran it again. We ran it once in the Times and once on our website. It was very controversial internally because there was some concern about it hurting sales. We don't want to hurt sales because we want to meet our obligations as a company. But at the same time, we thought it was really important to start to change the relationship with the customer. Some people would say, well, you're telling them not to buy from you, and we would argue back and say what we're doing is making an extension of the argument for buying high quality. So buy less, buy better, have less of an overall impact because everything costs nature.
So I think we're close to the end of the time, but maybe I'll give each of you, after you've sort of had the chance to talk with each other, clearly you have an audience that can make an impact when they leave this room. You want to each give them a parting bit of message that you'd like them to take home?
Sure. I'll start. Yeah, I mean, I think, as I was kind of just saying, IEX is a choice, and we plan on becoming an exchange. We plan on competing with the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, and I think that IEX kind of represents this revolution of end investors and companies coming together to build a better and fairer stock market, one that represents the reason the stock market was created in the first place. So, IEXtrading.com is our website. You can get us emails through that site, and if there's people interested in learning more, we'd be happy to talk about it.
Scott?
All I got to say is everyone has a lot of power to organize community, and communities is probably a word you use in your. I'm guessing, I don't really know your industry, know your business, but I'm guessing you use that word, community, occasionally. And it's like the most overused, undefined, vague word in the world. After 150 million RSVPs to meetups, I've come to a definition of community, which is that community is what happens when people are talking, which sounds just stupid and simple, but it really, the question is, how can you design, how can you design real estate? How can, I love the idea of thinking of urban land. It's not like urban land is it should be designed for people to actually connect, collaborate, form community, and really think about what the hell that word community really means. It just means, are people actually talking?
Vincent?
I think that's a lovely definition of community. What I'm seeing and what Brad's doing and what Scott's doing and what Patagonia has evolved to do over its 40 years is an evolution from this kind of centralized culture and economy that we had in the 50s to one that is more devolved and more intimate. So, some of the developments in New York City since 9/11, the most beautiful is the High Line. And it gets people out walking. It has plants. It has benches and places for people to eat and talk. And that's communities of people talking are what we're going to need to address climate change, and the social changes will deal with for the rest of our lifetimes.